How's it going, guys? I'm Mike Dwyer from the Bunker Recordings and BetterMixes.com, and today I'm going to show you another super cool plugin that I use in my mixes, and it's Spectre from Wavesfactory. So this is Spectre, and basically it's like the coolest saturation plugin ever. It's a little bit weird and quite a bit different from your typical saturation plugin, but ultimately that's what makes it really cool and really useful. And actually, before we get into this, let's just crank this up nice and big. That might be a little too big. There we go. Okay, easier to see now. So at first glance, this might just look like a fairly typical EQ, but there's a lot more going on than that. So basically, whenever we boost one of these bands, what the plugin is doing is it's pushing this area of the frequency spectrum into the saturation. So in other words, where we have this set here, we would pretty much only be saturating around 600 hertz. Obviously, as you can see on the graph here, we are reaching down all the way past 100 and past 3K, but it's primarily focused here at 600. And you can always tighten the Q up if you really wanted to get super precise, or widen it out to get a little bit of everything, or whatever. But with that, you've got a lot of control over your saturation. If you just want to saturate the low end or the top end, or kind of everything but the low end, something like that, you can do really anything with that. And then to make it like a billion times more versatile, each one of these bands can be set to a different saturation type. And there are a bunch of them here, like maybe 10 or something. We've got solid, warm, tube, tape, class B, diode, digital, bit, rectify, half rectify, and clean, which isn't any saturation at all. That would basically just be an EQ. But with all these settings, you can really get a ton of different sounds. The first maybe half of them or so here are a little more on the subtle end, maybe a little more natural sounding. And then down here, the second half, you get some really crazy creative kind of sounds with those. Then the next thing that makes this plugin super cool is, so in this case, we are pushing our top end into the saturation. But since this plugin is essentially EQing into the saturation, along with all the harmonics we're getting here, we're also getting, 12 decibels of 6.6K. And that could potentially be a good or a bad thing. But if you like all the saturation it's adding, but don't like that extra 12 decibels of 6K, they have this de-emphasis filter. So with that on, it basically applies a equal but opposite EQ curve after the saturation. So in this case, after our saturation, it will be cutting 12 decibels at 6.62K. So that way, we're only getting the saturation and not the boost in top end that we were originally getting. Now, depending on your settings, you still might get a boost in top end just from all those extra harmonics, but I really like this de-emphasis feature, so you can push it a little bit harder and really let the harmonics and the saturation do the work. But anyway, let's get into some examples of this so you can really see how it works. So I'm just going to set this back to how I had it. And this example I have on my floor tom. So let's take a listen to this. Currently, all that we have on the floor tom is a gate. So sounds okay, but obviously needs a little bit of help. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this low band and I'm going to boost it down around the fundamental frequency of the floor tom. So let's see if we can find that. All right, so it sounds like it's somewhere around there. Now let me just tweak that a little bit and dial in just how much saturation I want. Let's go with that for now. So I'm pushing about 7.5 decibels, around 75 hertz, into the saturation, and I'm using the warm setting here. I really like this one. And we have the de-emphasis mode enabled. So after the saturation, Spectre is cutting 7.5 decibels. So all that extra body you're hearing is just from the saturation and the extra harmonics it's generating. So let's do a before and after of just this one move and see what that does for us. So that's adding a ton of bottom end to that tom. So now let's see if we can use Spectre to add in a little bit of top end attack. And let's try switching the mode to solid and see if that works better. That sounded pretty cool. And maybe I'll just dial in a little bit of mid-range too. Yeah, that sounded pretty nice. So let's do it before and after and see what we've done so far. So that's a pretty big difference. Let's bring the output down a little bit just to get a little bit closer to level matching. So yeah, that's sounding really, really good. And again, we accomplished this all with just saturation, which is pretty crazy. So let's do the same thing to our rack tom real quick. So again, we'll dial in a nice narrow band around the fundamental frequency. So right around there is working. But even with this cranked all the way up to 12 decibels, I don't think I'm quite getting as much low end as I want. So in this case, I'm going to turn the de-emphasis filter off. So it won't be doing that equal but opposite cut after the saturation. So we are actually adding in all of this low end. And let me just bring this back down again and dial it in now. Now that's feeling a lot better. And stuff like this is one of my favorite uses for this plugin. Whenever you want something to have a really big, beefy low end, but that low end just like isn't there. I mean, you could EQ in like 20 decibels of it or something to get that low end. But by combining EQ with saturation in this plugin, it makes it a lot easier to get that big, massive, solid low end. But moving on, let's go ahead and boost some top end as well. So pretty big transformation for just using a saturation plugin. So moving on from there, let's take a look at Spectre on bass. So in this case, I have a bass DI and I'm using STL Tone Hub on it as my amp sim plugin. Let's hear that. So sounds okay, but definitely needs some help. So I play Spectre before Tone Hub. And basically, I'm thinking of using this as kind of like a guitar pedal going into an amp. But you could obviously use it after the amp as well. But let's give this a shot. So let's try driving some mid-range into this amp. So that's definitely helping a little bit. But even cranked all the way up at 12 decibels, we're still not getting nearly enough attitude out of this. And that's because we are in subtle mode. When we're looking at the toms, the subtle mode was perfect for what I wanted because I didn't want to be hearing like really obvious distortion on my toms. But in this case, I kind of do. So you have subtle, medium, and aggressive. Let's just jump straight to aggressive and see what that does. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. And let's try a couple of different modes here to see what's working. All right, so I actually really kind of like diode there. It gave a really cool kind of fuzzy sound, but I think tube is going to work better for this track. So let me just play around with the frequency a little bit more and see if I can get this in a spot that I like. So that's working pretty well. And let me try adding a second band a little bit higher up. And just for fun, let's see if that diode mode works better here. That's sounding cool. So we're using tube mode around 800 Hz, which is giving us a much more gentle saturation, but really helping to push the mid-range into the amp. And then here, just a little bit below 2K, using diode mode, is really giving us that nice kind of fuzzy distortion, which is really adding a lot of definition. Now, let's just fine-tune our amount of drive, and to do that, I'm going to hit this link button, which is going to link our input and our output, so we can push our input up to drive the plugin harder, or back it down a little bit to go a little more easy on it, while still having about the same perceived volume. That sounded pretty cool. Let's do a before and after of what we've got so far. Yeah, I'm liking that. Let's try seeing what it sounds like without the de-emphasis filter though, so that we're actually boosting these frequencies into the amp sim, as well as just distorting them. Yeah, I think I like that a little bit better. Let's just flip back and forth real quick to double check. Yeah, that's really bringing out a lot more definition. But now it sounds like maybe we're going a little too far with these moves. So you could just grab them and drag them down, but I like the balance we've got between them. So I'm just going to come down to the mix knob and dial that back a little bit. So I'm really liking it there at about 35%. So hopefully you're starting to see how versatile this plugin is. On our drums, we're using it as kind of a combination of both EQ and like harmonic exciter or something. Then on our bass, we're using it as like the world's most versatile overdrive pedal. And obviously you could apply the same concept on guitar as well. And one last cool feature to mention on this is that each band can independently be set to stereo, left, right, mid, or side. So on any stereo tracks, that really opens up a whole new world of possibilities. For instance, sometimes I might use this as my mix bus EQ. You'll see a lot of people using really colorful character EQs on their mix bus, and you can really use this plugin as like the world's most versatile colored EQ, since you can dial in exactly how much saturation you want and what style of saturation for all these different bands. So let's try it on this instrumental mix here. First off, I'm going to turn the de-emphasis off so that we actually will be boosting these frequencies. And let's start with the top end, and we'll just give a nice gentle lift, but let's set it to only process the side information. And let's start with, I don't know, maybe tube mode. We might play with it. So we're adding a nice little bit of sheen on top, but by doing it only on the sides, it's also giving us a little bit of a stereo widening kind of thing. And maybe let's try adding a little bit of low end as well. So yeah, something like that sounded pretty good. Maybe we'll try setting this low band to just do the mid signal. So any bits of the guitars or anything that are kind of floating down into this area won't be getting boosted. It'll really just be focusing on really our drums and our bass. maybe I'll just back the mix down a hair. And that sounded pretty good. So I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope you give this plugin a shot. It really is super, super versatile and can do a ton of different stuff, and is a lot of fun to play around with. If you want to learn more about the plugin, I'll put a link to the company's website in the description down below. And I'm pretty sure they've got a free trial of this, so you can try it out for yourself on your own music and see how it works for you. But anyway, if you did like this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. Also, head on over to bettermixes.com to grab a free copy of my Ultimate EQ cheat sheet.